Welcome to the Just Third Way podcast, where we ask the question, would you rather own or be owned? Brought to you by the Center for Economic and Social Justice at CESJ.org.
Hello, thanks for listening again, and this is Dave Hamill, and we're talking today with Dawn Brohawn. Welcome, Dawn.
Welcome, Dave.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear your voice, and I'm sure some of the listeners are too, because they hear from Norm and Mike a lot, and I think it'll be a good opportunity to hear some of your angle on things.
Well, I'm honored that you're interviewing me and giving me an opportunity to maybe give some of my particular perceptions on this big idea we call the Just Third Way.
Right. I was thinking the other day, you probably have a title, and I should probably know what it is. It's probably something like Director of, I guess it wouldn't be operations at a nonprofit. What is the actual title?
Oh, very good question. One of the nice things about being one of the founders is that I get to make up titles as I need them. So, well, my official title is Director of Communications, and okay. I'm also the treasurer for CESJ, so I'm on the executive committee and the board of CESJ. And also, since I started the internship and fellowship program, I kind of put that down in my signature line as Director of CESJ Internships and Fellowships. But it all, it's fluid.
Well, that sounds like an awful lot of work. A lot more work than the average person might think it is.
We have a good team here, and we have people like yourself helping us outside of the headquarters. But as you point out, it's a lot of work, and I do. When you mentioned Director of Operations, I guess a lot of that does fall to me. But we're all volunteer, and that's why we're always looking for more good volunteers like yourself.
Well, I appreciate all that you do, and I think it's a nice balance the way you kind of got Norm with the overall probably, vision, and then Mike does the historian and detail work, and I think you're the one that actually steers the message, like you said, communication, and come up with the strategies to get it done. And I think you're doing a great job, especially with your focus on reaching younger people. And I was just kind of wondering how, people like I can help you to, accomplish those goals. Do you have any specific things you're working on that listeners might be able to help with?
Well, there are a number of things. Of course, our internships and fellowships are a good way to steer people who are engaged in studies, or scholars or academics who are very curious about how we can use principles of economic and social justice and good principles of finance to change our systems to really create equal opportunities for every child, woman, and man to become an owner of capital that'll produce an income for them. And so we have this new paradigm. I think CESJ has woven together various strands of thought that have been around for a long time, but they've never really come together in a coherent way. And so our paradigm is meant to help us understand what's happening in the world today, what is causing change. And it looks at also how do we solve problems like poverty and war and technological displacement of people's labor by these new tools. And there's a whole host of problems facing every person on the planet today. And the old systems have become inadequate for solving them. So we think we have really a new approach that could address these problems more effectively and in a more just way. So my role, I think my big role is trying to craft language that can express these ideas in an understandable way. All three of us really have been honing the concepts that were developed by Louis Kelso and Mortimer Adler, Dr. Harold Moulton's ideas on central banking, Father William Ferree's concepts of social justice, which really he was clarifying the thought of Pius XI and Leo XIII in their social encyclicals. And there are thinkers like Bucky Fuller who offer a way of looking at the physical world and the design of our physical systems and technologies. So you do more with less, and you can enable every person to be successful on our planet Earth. So, and thinkers like Martin Luther King, who looked at how you change systems from unjust patterns to just patterns, but doing it in a peaceful way. So all of that is part of CESJ's framework, which we call the Just Third Way. And then we have the practical solutions we've been honing for many years. And this also came out of many of Louis Kelso's ideas. And we think we've added to that thought, and that's called Capital Homesteading, and based on the theory of binary economics that Kelso developed. So these are ideas which Norm and Mike, I'm sure, have discussed in greater detail, and there's plenty more to talk about. But anyway, so I'm here trying to figure out how to bring all these different ideas together in a way that if I were in the position of someone who had never heard these ideas, how would I be able to understand them? So, it's, I guess, putting myself in other people's shoes.
Well, you really just summed up all of the contributors to the overall, I guess, message that CESJ has put together. And it's such a beautiful thing, the way they all come together consistently. It's like anytime someone really sits down and thinks long and hard about how can we really build something that's truly just and works and follows the principles, of free markets and opportunity for everyone, and all these great thinkers kind of end up in the same direction, and that's neat. I don't think Norm or Mike has ever mentioned all of those names that you just did, and I would encourage everyone to go on the CESJ website and look at what each of those people contributed, because it's really fascinating how they all tie together.
You're absolutely right, Dave. And I'll just to give the URL for that, it's CESJ.org is our website.
Right. And it is a vast, vast website. I mean, it goes back with information that's been gathered for decades, really.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We consider it our online library, and in a sense, it's the history of a movement that most people aren't aware of, but that's what we're trying to do right now. And, I just want to comment on something you said, because I absolutely agree with that these are beautiful ideas. I mean, I think that's one reason that I decided to devote my life to this, and this is, following in my father's footsteps. But at a certain point, each of us has to make it our own. We have to own the ideas. And it's, for me, it was just that sense of these are such good and unifying and just ideas. And they're, we like to say they're part of the absolute values of truth, beauty, love, and justice is, that's what we're striving for. And I think all of these ideas in the Just Third Way reflect those basic principles. And as you said, they come together so coherently, both the ideas of economic and social justice and the principles of those ideas, and also the applications, which really couldn't happen if you didn't have a way to escape the bonds of the past, the patterns of the past, which if we continue in that direction, really things will not change. That the big problem we see of power and ownership getting concentrated just more and more swiftly all the time that will continue unless we have a way to see how the future offers us a way to bring everyone into the ownership game, and that we have to bring everyone into the ownership game, or otherwise you're always going to have permanent class warfare. And
Right.
and you can't have a free market system. We don't have one now. And if you want one, if you believe in free markets, you better make sure that the playing field is level. And that will only happen when everyone has an equal opportunity and equal access to the means to become a self-sufficient owner of capital.
Right. You mentioned growing up around these concepts, and it's obvious that not only were you just exposed to them and had an opportunity to learn about them, but you're also passionate about it. I don't know if everyone knows that you are Norm's daughter, because obviously you have a different last name because you're married, but how was that when you were growing up? Did you get tired of hearing that stuff for a while, and then one day the light bulb just came on?
Oh, no, actually, I always was inspired by his work. My father was involved early on in the civil rights movement. He was a federal investigator who was sent down to Mississippi during what we would say the organizing period of the civil rights movement, when SNCC convened and soon after launched the Freedom Summer. And Norm was there at one of the organizing meetings, and he saw that these people coming together with a very simple and just message that he said he knew that battle was already won. And this was at a time, and this Norm will tell us this, that the Supreme Court never, people didn't think that segregation would ever be eliminated within 200 years. Just
Right.
the political setup at the time and the power of the Southern representatives in Congress. So, where people were saying this is not going to happen for a long, long time, Norm could see by these young people engaging in what we would call the act of social justice. In other words, organizing with others with a common set of principles and values and a vision that's right. You organize like you're in a war, but with peaceful means, in order to change the system. And so you have to understand where the flaws and weaknesses and defects are in the system. And that's one thing that's important. And then you have to understand what needs to be changed. How will you change it in a way that is consistent with universal values? So it has to be good for everyone. It has to be win-win, or otherwise you're, back to the drawing table trying to solve another conflict. But in any case, so Norm, as he would tell us about his exploits, and we would meet some of the people, prominent people in the civil rights movement. In fact, Medgar Evers, about 2 months, I think, before he was assassinated, had actually stayed at our home.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's like, and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't quite understand, but it was so inspiring. And so I think my father has always inspired me with his passion for justice. And as I later grew to understand, his extreme knowledge of power and how you can structure power so that it gets diffused to every person. And he understands that if you allow power to start getting concentrated, it will inevitably have corruption. So he was working with civil rights leaders, and then after the Voting Rights Act was passed, he moved into the war on poverty. And he was fortunate enough to be working for the Citizens Crusade Against Poverty. He was hired by Dick Boone, who happened to be a descendant of Daniel Boone. Yeah, it was very interesting. But the chairman of the Citizens Crusade was Walter Reuther, who was probably the greatest labor leader who ever lived. He was a true statesman who must have been exposed to the ideas of Louis Kelso. And I should say, during the period when Norm was working in the war on poverty, he came across the ideas of Louis Kelso, and that just changed his life. He saw that the old approach he was looking at, and this was Milton Friedman talking about essentially a redistributive approach with the tax system. This is Milton Friedman saying these things. It was called the negative income tax. And Norm said he couldn't figure out a better way to deal with poverty until he came across the ideas of Louis Kelso, which, right, showed you how you could change the system to open up equal opportunity to money and credit in such a way people could purchase assets, invest in assets that would pay for themselves, and thereby thereafter produce a stream of income for the owners. So when Norm heard this, he brought the ideas into the Citizens Crusade, and he also introduced Louis Kelso to those people. There's many fascinating stories he can tell, but Walter Reuther testified soon after, saying that if workers could get their gains through ownership and profit sharing, then this would come out of the bottom line rather than adding to costs. And so he recognized that this is how American industry could remain competitive in the world marketplace versus, what direction we took, which was just to get automatic pay increases, whether or not a company was actually being more profitable or productive. But through these automatic pay increases, you increase the costs, the fixed costs of what you're trying to sell. So that's, one major reason that we're not competitive today in terms of labor prices. And unfortunately, many of our basic industries moved out, to other countries. And
there's such an atmosphere of competitiveness between management and labor.
That's right. And that's another thing, is that even how we run our companies, they violate principles of participation and equal opportunity to contribute through both your labor and your capital ownership. That's another way people can add to the production and productivity and profitability of the companies through their ownership. So this is something on the micro side, where the principles of the just third way would offer ways that people's self-interest could be united. And it requires really the opening up of ownership opportunities to where people wouldn't feel the need to keep raising the minimum wage, which is, it's only going to add to cost, and we'll be right back where we started, needing another huge raise in the minimum wage. Whereas ownership, you have flexibility, and so this is a new approach. It's aimed at changing cultures within companies so that you can unite the interests of management, the unions, and the workforce. So
basically, you understand these things so well. At some point, you just said, "Dad, I want to work with you. I want to make this my career too."
You're absolutely right, and it's each person has to reach that point for him or herself, and that's really what we're trying to do, is explain this idea in a way that inspires people. And as you say, we're really see a special place for young leaders and the age group called millennials, who I know, they're not a monolithic group. And there's quite a difference between age 17 to age 30 something. But these are the next generation of leaders in business, in politics, in academia, and all of our other fields. And so before they become too locked into the old system, we want to offer them a new perspective that's much more hopeful, it's more constructive, it's win-win, and it reduces a lot of the unnecessary conflict and poverty in the world. So we're not experts in social media, and as you pointed out, the millennials are, and even the up and coming generation after them. But these are the people who know how to organize, using these powerful communications technologies. And you can see even right now in Iran with all the riots in the streets that these appear to have really organized pretty spontaneously. And it's, I think, because they have access to these communications, social media.
Absolutely. It's all about, information access. It was the same thing with the Arab Spring. And that's why I agree with you about the millennials. They're the ones that are listening too, because people that are my age and older, on average are just not plugged in. So they don't even know how messed up, the system is.
That's right. And, I think, and part of the problem that we're facing is the ideas that are being taught now in universities. And Norm likes to say the problem is that in academia. Well, I would say more specifically, it's with the paradigms being taught. And those have become, I would say, very socialist. And I'm using that term in a specific way. It's really looking towards government as the solution to a lot of the problems we have. And it's also a framework that makes people more and more dependent on the state in order to be able to have an income. And that means redistribution from those who produce and those who have to those who don't. And all of that creates a very undemocratic system. So what's happening now, and this has probably been going on since the Vietnam War, is that in reaction to, an elitist, oligopolistic system of capitalism, which, we like to say we believe in free markets, limited economic power of government, full rights of private property, the way that many conservatives, would agree. But where we see the problem is that there are actual barriers in the laws and policies that prevent people from participating as owners. Even though, you'll hear a lot of economists and others, politicians saying, well, anyone can become an owner in America. Well, the truth is there are not too many people now, beyond some extraordinary cases, who could earn
from poverty to serious ownership.
Yeah, to where if they couldn't work, their capital would pay them an income to survive. I mean,
right.
Look at most people have 401k plans. When they retire, honestly, most people are not going to have that much. If you don't have that many people really very deeply invested in 401k plans. And I know in my husband's company, it's a lot of people are hesitant to do that. They're worried about, I guess, from the last stock market crash, what happened to savings. And so it's, they're scared. And then we have the problem that, frankly, full-time jobs are disappearing. They talk about how unemployment's going down, but look at the nature of the jobs that are being created. There's a lot of people are underemployed. And then also there's a lot of benefits are being stripped away or eliminated. So that whole, what we would call a wage welfare system is starting to implode. And so we need to replace it with what we think is a more just system, and that's the ownership system.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people may not know it, but you actually wrote the book on Capital Homesteading. You were one of the co-authors. So I was thinking, since you have all this knowledge, have you ever thought about how you just explain in a brief period of time the overall, capital homesteading plan? I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I guess,
that's a good question. And it's actually something that we in CESJ, we face this challenge every day, and we're constantly trying to think of the most succinct way to explain this, or at least get people engaged in asking more questions. But since you bring that up, I tried putting together a so-called elevator speech. I haven't timed it, but let's see how it works.
All right.
Okay. Do you agree that our economic system is creating a growing wealth, income, and power gap between a tiny percentage of people, the super rich, and most other people in the economy, the so-called middle
Most
class
people
and
would
poor?
say yes.
Good. Do you agree that the government's growing deficit and debt is unsustainable and that future taxpayers will be unable to cover our nation's financial obligations under our present tax system?
Yeah.
Okay, that was a long sentence. Do you agree that most jobs today are vulnerable to being eliminated by advanced technologies such as robotics and artificial intelligence?
Yes.
Do you agree that something new needs to be done to solve these problems?
Yes.
Then, what if there was a way that we could re-engineer our economic system so that every child, woman, and man in America could receive, through local banks, an equal allotment of $7,000 in interest-free credit to invest in our nation's growth and new technologies? What if every citizen could accumulate tax-free from birth to age 65, $500,000 in income-producing assets paid for by the future profits of those assets?
Wow.
Yeah, good. Wow, good. And what if this could all be done without using any taxpayer dollars and without taking away anyone's wealth or property rights?
Yep. That
Yep.
makes sense.
Well, there is a plan for doing that. It's called the Capital Homestead Act, and it would change our money and credit systems, our tax systems, and our inheritance policies so that every child born today could gain by age 65 $460,000 in tax-sheltered assets, $46,000 in annual after-tax income, and over their lifetime from birth to age 65, $1.6 million in dividends, dividend incomes. Would that be of interest to you?
Wow, that is beautiful. You did it.
Oh, okay, good. Did you time it?
No, I didn't, but it wasn't very long, and it got the person, whoever you're talking to, involved, and it totally hit the specifics. That is really beautiful. I hope everyone will treasure that recording the way I will. That's great.
Oh, okay. Well, Dave, I'll send you the text there, and I have to work on my delivery, but I know you're really good at this. And I just wanted to mention, Norm stepped into the room, and he handed me his new license plates, Virginia license plates, and it's the number 4, then JUSTZ. For justice.
Okay, for justice.
And then he has underneath that, United We Stand. So that's what we're all about.
Right.
My mother just.
So do you still have ESOP 1, and that's the second vehicle?
Oh, no, I think this is higher than ESOP 1.
Oh, yeah, it is. Oh,
Right.
that's great.
Yeah.
I need to get something like that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I renewed 3RD, RD, Third Road, and so that's supposed to be a conversation starter. But, yeah, anyways.
Well, that's good. Well, I wanted to also ask you, I know there's small ways that anyone can help without being an official volunteer, such as being active on Twitter. Do you have any specific stuff like that you want to ask people to do?
Yeah, well, if they want to become volunteers, there is a quick way to find out, what sort of things that we need help with. And that is if you go to the home page, at the top right corner, there's a green button that says volunteer. And on the survey and application, it will list all the different areas where people can help advance the cause. Now, in terms of just small things they could do, if they don't want to, they're not ready to commit a lot of time, is I would say first start reading the materials on CESJ's website. And the best place to start is the Welcome Center, which you can get to through the home page. And really, that if you like the ideas, they should inspire you to see where you could place your talents in order to help advance this idea. And so that's the first thing people can do is just read and ask questions and contact us with their questions, and pose it to other people. Let other people know about this website and encourage them to contact us. Now, as you mentioned, we also have a Twitter account, and it's at CESJ_org. And so, we would encourage that. And Mike Graney, our Director of Research, has a Just Third Way blog, daily blog, as a matter of fact. And you can get to that from the left-hand column on the homepage. And you can also follow CESJ's Facebook account as well. So those are, things that you can do that can help. And, if we were to say what is the most, other than educating yourself, what would the most important thing you could do is what Norm likes to call open the door. And that's really important, that everyone is they're part of networks. They may have contacts who have great influence, or know people can get to people with great influence. And the open the door strategy is really how the employee stock ownership plans got into the law. And that was as a result of my father's collaboration with Louis Kelso. Back in the early 70s, they found a champion on Capitol Hill, Senator Russell Long, who was the son of Huey Long. And he was introduced to Kelso's ideas through one of his aides. And he said immediately, I want to talk to these people. And so that's another one of our stories. We got lots of stories, but Norm and Kelso met with Senator Long and his aide, and this was 3 hours at one of Washington's best restaurants, and Senator Long picked up the dinner tab. But he asked some questions, and at the end he asked, what are you people doing about it? And Norm leaped in, mentioning some legislation that they already had put together. And so Long agreed to champion that, and it was really the first of over 20 pieces of legislation that have put employee stock ownership plans into U.S. law. But it wouldn't have happened except through a series of open the doors. And it's another fascinating story which you can you can read about. There's an article on our website called Dinner at the Madison, and I highly recommend that.
Yes, that is so true. If we can get influential people to be exposed to the ideas, some of them might start working for it. And you can do that if you already know someone influential, or just by being active on social media and Twitter, retweet, share Mike Greeney's blog. And you never know, one of these people may be reading something and the light bulb comes on for them like it has for you and me. And you've done a great job of coordinating volunteers in that direction. And also I was thinking, you're the one that sort of started the intern thing, right?
Yeah, it started, I'd say, in the early 90s, and it came about through one of our members, Kemp Harshman, who suggested to the son of a friend that he intern with CESJ, and we'd never had interns before. And so we had this young student over for the summer, and we had several projects he was involved in. And from that, I decided, well, this is such a good thing. Why don't we institutionalize it? So I've been developing the program so that people can get to it, information and application on the CESJ website. And it mentions the nature of this internship is it's not, we don't want to have our interns making copies or making coffee.
Right.
They really have to almost think in a business-like way in terms of what project that they could do that not only would help add to their own career path and area of interest, but what would serve CESJ in helping us get the message out, particularly to other young people. But as a result of this, we've had, I guess, about 8 or 9 interns and 4 research fellows. And the fellows are people who have at least a graduate degree and generally have worked in private business or in the government for a number of years. And through all of these different individuals who come to us with different backgrounds and skills, we've been able to add to our armament of different ideas and solutions. And one thing I want to mention too, in particular, our most recent intern, Brian Vosper, actually got this podcast idea started for us. And
Right.
yeah, and then you so graciously took that responsibility over when Brian finished his internship. So I want to thank him for that. And
He
also,
contacted me also, and he's given me support, and he and I might do some work together also.
very good. I'm delighted to hear that. And the other intern I want to really make a special mention of is Eliza Riley. And both of those interns came to us through Brigham Young University. And Eliza was able, through her internship, to combine it with a research project she was involved with her professor at BYU, which was to do a citizen survey in Ukraine. And as Eliza and I talked about what her project might be, we decided that we could dovetail the projects. And so CESJ became involved with developing the questions for the survey that related to capital ownership and how citizens in Ukraine would view the opportunity to become capital owners versus, the Stalinist system that came out of, and then after that, the monopoly capitalist approach that came in soon after. So
just varying forms of exploitation.
Exactly. And so this was, as far as we know, one of the first times, if not the first time, this sort of survey had been put together. It was administered by a professional survey group in Ukraine, and it for us was surprisingly positive because this idea is foreign to the people that it was posed to. The questions were posed to, because how many people, including how many Americans, really understand what it means to own capital, income producing capital that generates your income for you. And these people lived in a communist system, and yet they saw the importance of opportunity, that they saw this as a way they could become economically independent and not subject to the corruption that it's rampant in Ukraine. So, we didn't expect everyone 100% of the population to say, yes, we must have this, but it was a large percentage, I'd say more so than the so-called capitalist approach that people viewed favorably. Because I think the problem was once the shock therapy and the oligarchs started gaining power, then the ordinary citizen in the former Soviet Union, they were really left out of the growth. And so there's a lot of poverty, and people are not doing as well as they should, and there's corruption. It's a pretty rotten system. So when they were posed sort of a new alternative, I was really happy to see how open-minded people were. So in any case, what Eliza has, she made several presentations at national conferences, and this she's also, I guess, trying to get her findings published by a major scholarly journal. So we're really proud of the work she did, and the survey itself could be replicated in other countries, and so it was a tremendous contribution to CESJ.
Right, absolutely. It's been almost miraculous the way we've had, super smart people to get involved and add things that, individuals wouldn't have thought of. So that's good. I think about it, some of the volunteers too that have done amazing work, like Monica Woodman and Bob Brantley and Russell Williams, and also someone that you might hesitate to mention because of impartiality is Roland Brohawn.
Roland, my dear husband, you're absolutely right. He's one of the unsung heroes. He's one of the quiet forces behind the scenes. And I couldn't be doing this work without Roland's support. And I was really fortunate that when I met him, I think he was searching for a better system. It's fairly rare for anyone that I think most people don't really spend much time thinking about, is this economic and political system the best one that we can have, or if there are problems, what would be a better way? And I think the people who gravitate to CESJ are, they have a passion for justice. They have a strong sense of injustice, but they want to do something about it. And Roland, soon after he heard about the work I was doing with my father, he got fascinated. And so he's provided just so much creativity and his skills as a graphic designer, but also he's very sensitive to the way ideas are transmitted and how people understand new ideas. And he's actually a great communicator in his own right. He just sort of gets down to, the brass tacks, and he's...
Yeah, I've seen some of his posts on Facebook when people are in discussions, and he knows how to, like you say, communicate the
yes,
message.
Yeah, the message. So, I can't say enough good things about Roland. And I have to say, like Roland, my mother has been another unsung hero, and she really enabled my father to do his work.
Right.
So
I
cool.
think I remember you telling me that she was influential in the college degree for you and your brothers.
Yes. She is a truly strategic thinker. So she knew that couldn't quite depend on my father's work to generate enough income to pay for 3 college educations, and so she found out that if she was employed at Georgetown University, that they had a tuition program there, and so she had to suffer to get us that education. And so that was her thinking ahead, and she's also made it possible, as I said, for all these years, since I think when she first met my father, she realized that he was sort of an unusual person who wanted to change the system to benefit everyone, and so she supported him in that, and sometimes it was very risky, and when you're doing the work of revolution, in this case a peaceful revolution, but it is changing the system. It's something you do for love and not for the money.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
gotta keep the roof over the heads. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's true. That's true. Well, it's so great to hear your angle on things, and it is good for people to kind of get a glimpse of what's going on behind the scenes. Um, interestingly, I was thinking the other day about you and some of the things that I've actually learned from you. You were the first person to teach me that compound interest is a flawed concept. And, no one else had ever mentioned that. And I was just wondering, how did you come up with that as one of your sort of platforms?
Well, I'm surprised it was coming from me and not Mike Graney, because he's done so much research into the history of money and the concepts of usury, and but as I understand from this binary economics concept of Kelso, which is really looking at how you enable every person to have the means to become a capital owner, and as well as being the owner of their own labor, and that in order to move the world into that new reality, this is going to depend a lot on how we finance new growth, the new technologies, the new ownership opportunities. And if we stay in the old system, which has certain assumptions which are counterproductive, they add to the cost of doing business, and they don't allow for new owners, as a general way that society runs. It doesn't encourage or enable people to become owners. So in the case of compound interest, and we hear from all the financial gurus that about the magic of compound interest. And I must say, as a saver, someone with a savings account, not that there's much return these days, but it sure is nice to suddenly see money magically making more money.
Yeah, if you own a bank, it's a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah, I would say probably more so to banks and other people who are charging compound interest, like the credit card companies. It's really a windfall for them. If you miss a payment, you can be in credit card debt forever. But essentially, the problem is that it's using credit in the wrong way. And we believe that the idea of loans and credit is it's an important thing. It's based on promises and contracts, and the contracts are a promise to deliver something of value. And so this relates to how you can create through the system interest-free credit, because no one is putting up their savings the way, if you loan out your savings, you expect interest to be paid. In this case, there is no what we call past savings involved. So you can create this new credit, and coincidentally with that, new asset-backed money, so that people can get these loans, invest in growth assets or transferred assets that companies use to generate more profits. And when the profits flow to you as the owner, or initially through you to the lender, then that way you're not having to decrease your own savings or decrease your paycheck. It's the assets themselves, and they have to be well managed, in a company with good management and good workforce and a good product and customers with money. If they can generate profits, that's how you can repay a capital loan.
Right.
We can do it now with employee stock ownership plans. And that way, 100% of the workers in a number of companies have become 100% owners without putting up a penny of their own or reducing their paychecks. But now, through what we call the Capital Homestead Act, we're looking at how can you universalize this idea of universal access to interest-free credit and asset-backed money. So,
right.
It
needs to happen because the whole system is based on basically not only frivolity, but really corruption. I mean, most people don't know. I mean, I didn't even know until probably maybe 7 or 8 years ago that, banks don't necessarily have the money that they loan out. I mean, there's some reserve requirements, but they're not really necessarily enforced. And like if you go to borrow $200,000 to buy a house, the bank may have had between $0 and $20,000 when they wrote the check to the seller, And the bad news is really for whoever's borrowing the money is with the compound interest, you're probably going to pay $500,000 over the life of the loan. So the bank that risked $20,000 is getting $500,000. I mean, it's just nuts.
Yeah.
And we're talking about loaning money into existence also, but not with the compounding interest, and not for something that doesn't actually produce new goods and services, right?
Exactly. And, I think you were alluding to the ideas of fractional reserve banking. And
right.
Under our proposal, it's 100% reserve backing. And, what are those reserves? Well, it has to do with the promises, the contracts that businesses will develop, uh, which relate to the new growth that they are going to bring into existence, the new goods and services.
Right.
And so, as Mike Graney can go into great detail of how the local banks, in conjunction with the central banks, specifically the regional federal reserves, can create new money that is backed by what's called bills of exchange, and that is basically a promise to deliver something, and it's the bank issues the corresponding promissory note that we will lend you this money if you promise to pay us back, by a certain date. And so you can take those bills of exchange, which are basically contracts, and you can, the word is monetize, turn them into money that can be paid to these companies that want to use your investment to purchase the new capital assets. And so it's a loan, it's credit from the standpoint, in this case, of a citizen who's now what we call a capital homesteader, that they will get this loan, this credit, and the bank will go to the regional Federal Reserve and turn it into another form of money, because contracts are a form of money, but you can't use them easily, in the general economy. So what the central bank does, and specifically the regional Federal Reserves, they take those bills of exchange and they convert them into money that can be used by the companies that need to buy new assets. And then the capital homesteader sitting there now, he's just invested, but he's done it with credit. So he has an obligation to repay the local bank. And so then what happens, if there has to be a very careful feasibility study done of what the business is proposing to do, what their project's going to be. And so you have several layers of safeguards to make sure that, okay, this is a viable business proposition here, that, if they get these new plant equipment, this will enable them to increase their profits, their production by a certain percentage, and their profits by a certain percentage. And it's those profits that get paid to their new owners, the capital homesteaders, who, as the repayment is taking place, those profits flow to pay off the loan, and the local bank then cancels out that portion of the money that the central bank created. But this whole process continues, this repayment of the capital homesteader's loan, until the point where, okay, now they own those shares free and clear, and as they continue to generate income, profits, and paid out as dividends, that becomes income to the capital homesteader. So right. It's a circular process, but it accomplishes its purpose, and then it cancels itself out. But at every point, you have some form of an asset. And then in addition to that, because you know that there will be a certain percentage of loans that don't work, even, if seem to be a good idea.
You got to have insurance involved.
Yeah, and that's also, collateral is one of the biggest barriers to the ordinary non-owning citizen acquiring ownership of, a significant amount. And that is, they don't have assets to, if the loan goes bad, they don't have any assets that the lender can seize. And so if you don't have money, it's very hard to get money in today's system. So what this does is it creates a substitute for collateral, those assets that can be taken if you don't pay your loan off, and it uses insurance. And so what I would suggest, because this can get pretty technical and detailed, that the process is covered in great deal within a book you can get from our website, the free ebooks. It's called Capital Homesteading for Every Citizen, and there's also a section on our website, CESJ.org/capital homesteading, and that will take you to a section that covers all aspects of this proposal. But
it is kind of complicated, but I was mentioning to you the other day, the system that we have is so utterly complicated and corrupt at the same time. 90% of Americans and from anyone really educated even know what's going on or can explain it. I can't really explain it, what goes on when they, write these bonds and monetize the government debt, and it's a nightmare. And once you kind of understand the basics of this thing, it's actually pretty simple.
Yeah, I think so. It's, engineers seem to like our ideas a lot because they can identify what's the input, what's the output, what's your feedback and correction principle or mechanism. And so all of this that, as complicated as it may sound, though that's because most people haven't really, learned about even to think in these terms. It's just not part of their daily routine. But if you look at today's tax system, I mean, the tax code is just thousands and thousands of pages long, and tax attorneys, they don't study the whole tax system. They have to specialize in tiny little niches in the tax laws. And they're set up, to cater to special interests, and really they're anti-free market. I mean, when you look at it. And so what we're talking about is going back to a very transparent tax system, which fulfills the purpose of a tax system, and that is to pay the costs of government. And to the extent we can reduce the burdens of government to be redistributing incomes, that's going to also lower the cost of government, because you won't need quite as many agencies, taking from Peter to give to Paul. We do want to have, government is a necessary institution. Norm likes to say it's our only legitimate monopoly, and that's the monopoly over coercion. But we need it to enforce contracts, to, police abuses, to ensure that there's a level playing field. There's certain things that government, you need it, to have a peaceful and just society, but you want to keep, because it's so dangerous, you want to minimize, particularly economic, in terms of economics, you want to minimize its economic power and place economic power directly in the hands of every human being. So,
right. If everyone is an owner, then you don't have a concentrated few that are paying the government to set up the system in their favor.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And so, I think our tax system in the Capital Homestead Act is designed to make sure we can pay the costs of government, and that we keep our promises as far as Social Security and Medicare. But we also see that we have to shift to a new approach that would move people towards ownership rather than dependency on welfare and state-run systems. So it's, we want to have a safety net, and we know that sometimes you never have a perfect system, and so you will need some way of helping people who fall between the cracks. But as a rule, this is what we're looking at, is, does the system make it sort of a norm that every citizen from the time they're born till the time they die has a feasible way of becoming an owner, of acquiring an ownership stake in the new technologies, and particularly the ones that are going to eliminate their jobs in the future. So, if we don't look towards ownership, you look at the average college student who now goes to college to get a good job or get training to get a good job, and then they get out and those jobs are no longer there, but the students have this enormous load of debt. It's just an insane and unsustainable system that we have in so many different areas. And we think if we get back to basics, and that has to do with, where should power start? Should it start with the government or a collective? Should it start with some kind of elite group of people? Or do we really believe in our democracy and say that power has to be in the hands of the people, meaning every person? To have a just society and an effective political democracy, you have to have economic justice and economic democracy. And that requires not only equal opportunity to provide your labor inputs as needed, but also to be able to contribute through your capital ownership, the assets that you can bring to the process of producing new goods and services. And if we want to keep power diffused, because we don't want it to be concentrated, and because we know the tendency of power to become corrupted when it is concentrated, then we have to think in terms of how our system is structured, that it's not sufficient to rely on the goodwill or the goodness of individuals. I mean, we want that, we need that, and we want to encourage that as a society. But if the system itself is running counter to people behaving in a virtuous way, in a way that is considerate of other people and looks to the dignity and empowerment and development of each person as being important for the world to operate in, in a successful way, then we have to re-engineer our systems. And I encourage people to explore the option of the just third way and capital homesteading as a policy change, and challenge it. If you like it, we certainly welcome everyone's participation, and particularly as we try to build that critical mass needed for change. But if you find something that you find wrong, tell us what you find wrong with it too, because that can help us refine how we apply this, refine the ideas, or maybe just refine the way we're communicating them. So
right. Well, I had one thought while you were saying that about how it is the system that's all messed up, and that what we're proposing is so great for millennials because they're throwing around a buzzword that I think is important, and that's post-scarcity.
Yes.
Because this system we have is messed up, but so many people think that there's, two basic money systems. There's creating money out of nothing, the Keynesian way, they put it in that category, and then they've got gold standard, and they think that's good money, But gold standard, that's based on something that is a limited resource, that's scarcity thinking. And the Keynesian thing is creating money for frivolity and the compounding interest we were talking about, and, just the whole not focusing on something productive. And what we're saying, like you had said, where it is asset backed, because when you're creating money, it's only for something that is actually being created that's substantial, that's growing the economy. And so that's the third way of thinking that I think we need to communicate. It's not Keynesian, it's not gold standard, it's this other thing that has actually existed several times in history very successfully. And that's the third way, not only the political third way, but the money system third way.
Yeah. And I think when you use the term post-scarcity, that brings in also the ideas of people like Buckminster Fuller, who are thinking about how we redesign our physical technologies so we could do more with less. And so his ideas of design science really need to be looked at carefully, because in our idea, this is a combination of sort of abstract concepts like money, that are, or invisible tools. I should say that invisible tools, social tools like money and tax systems and central banks and whatever. But it also requires that we're dealing in the physical world as well. We're creating things that people are going to consume.
Right.
And, so if we start with the assumption that we're going to run out and there's only going to be as much money in the system as, there's this particular asset, then that's a problem. If you limit yourself based on the amount of gold that may be available, that's a problem. And
Right.
Even if you use, and that's probably a primitive way of thinking about gold as a backing for money, because, some people said, no, it's really just having a standard of value that people, can have confidence that it's not going to change. So you take something like the price of gold, Well, even that, you can see how it's gone way up and way down. And, it's as you say, it's based on something that's finite, also something that can be manipulated. The price, for example, I think.
And hoarded. Rich people can buy a bunch of it and mess everyone else up.
That's exactly right. And so you have people who will game that and take advantage, whereas what Bucky Fuller was looking at was a standard of value based on something everyone needs, every country, every person, and that's energy. And so he looked at the kilowatt hour, the cost of producing a kilowatt hour, as being a fairly stable way of valuing our money. And so,
right. Like Norm said, that's a good yardstick measuring tool.
Yeah, you're right, because money, I think people stop thinking about money as just a tool to facilitate exchange, to facilitate the productions and distribution of goods and services. It's a tool. We don't eat the money. We eat the things that money can help us create. And so we don't want to get too hung up on, money is the thing that's so important. We really want to look, first at, let's face it, what we're talking about here today is, if you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, it's the lowest level of human needs, the economic needs. And really, what all these post-scarcity thinkers were aiming towards, it, this is remarkable, all of them, was really what are human beings capable of if they have their basic needs taken care of, and they're educated to, think in terms of how do you contribute to the world? How do you develop your potential and, follow your dreams, but do it in
do what you love, right?
Do what you love, exactly. How good would that be for the world? So, you're absolutely right.
Well, that is a great way to end on a positive note. I know we've taken a lot of time, but I could talk all day, and I know you could too, but
that's true.
We got to get back to our other commitments and also leave the podcast people wanting more next time, right?
Exactly, Dave.
Well, thank you very much, Dawn.
And thank you, Dave. You really are a wonderful interviewer. And
oh, well.
Yeah, because I always try and avoid TV cameras and radio interviews. So you kind of suckered me into this one, but I enjoyed it.
Well, I've noticed that Norm and Mike do most of the interviews, so I really wanted to hear what you had to say, and I've always enjoyed your speeches and things. I remember one time you wrote, it was either a song or a poem, or that was great.
Oh, yeah, I got a bunch of those. That's one of my attempts to simplify the message, but I appreciate your compliments.
You deserve them. Well, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care then, Dave.